We now have our second and final plenary panel. How can organizations and universities partner to deliver business education for the future? Now, this panel and this session is going to explore how academia and industry can partner together to ensure that students learn the skills that industry looks for. For example, some of the things that we've just heard Jackie and Monique discussing. Specifically, now we're going to hear from Jag Channa, the UK marketing leader for brand marketing and communications in EMEA Financial Services at Ernst & Young in London. Emanuele Loro, the CEO and director of Scorpio Tankers, and John Norton, the managing director of Crestline Investors, and who was formerly a director at Wells Fargo Capital Finance in the UK. To moderate this panel, I'd like to welcome Greg Minson. Greg is a global COO for real estate and the merchant banking division at Goldman Sachs. He serves on the board of visitors at Fordham College at Rose Hill and the board of directors of Fordham University in London. Greg earned a BA in economics from Fordham University in 1998. And once again, I'd like to welcome Greg and the panel for our final session today.
Well, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure being here. And it's a pleasure, sharing the virtual stage with my fellow panelists. Look, I think this is a topic, for people who know me, this is a topic that I really hold near and dear to my heart. I'm a firm believer in the so-called school life, and I think providing our students the ability to really practically apply what they learn in the classroom is a critical part of their education. And I think may even go out on a limb and say it's one of our obligations as an industry to provide that opportunity. So I'm really happy and excited to dive into this a little bit more with my fellow panelists. And thank you for joining us today. I know everybody's busy. So look, I have a series of questions. I would like to make sure we take some time at the end to answer questions from the audience as well. But I guess first question really is to Emanuele. This session is about how industry can connect better with the classroom. But before we dive into the how, I want to ask you, why do you think it's important for industry to partner with the classrooms and with the universities at large?
Thanks, Greg, and thanks everybody for having me, and thanks for the question. I think it's a good question. I think it's really paramount, really, to have this partnership between institutions and corporations or companies. I'll give you an example that pertains my company. I run a shipping company. We have about 9,000 employees. Of the 9,000 employees, about 90% is actually sea staff. Only 1,000 people, or a little bit less than that, sit ashore in our 14 offices. But the vast majority of the staff is seafarers. So in my case, or in the Scorpio case per se, it's a little bit atypical, I would call it, where rather than partnering up with business schools or universities for undergraduate or postgraduate courses, the bulk of our partnerships comes from maritime academies. We offer internship programs, cadet jobs to students that are coming from maritime academies. Usually, this is the nature of the business. This comes from countries where seafarers or the jobs at sea are still common and looked up to. So most of our cooperations come from India or the Philippines or the former Russian bloc, where a lot of these jobs are still looked up to and defined. And in the Western world, to a large extent, unfortunately, the merchant navy is seen as a second-tier job, maybe. So not all these aspirations to go at sea are present. The reason for this is, I think that is a very tough job, and people want to stay home. They don't want to go at sea for a long time. And to tell you the truth, you know, the romance of or the romantic side of sailing has changed so much as well, because now the regulations don't allow you to, you know, lead the ship, the security, the safety, all of these aspects which impact inevitably the life at sea. But going back to the question, I think that number one, it's always a two-way street. There needs to be cooperation. The opportunity needs to be provided by the companies to the universities and schools to allow their students to actually go into the real world. Your opening remarks by saying that, you know, the best school is the school of life, really meet my thoughts as well. And I think that the school of life sometimes happens within a school environment as well, because, you know, it is an experience within an experience, and or it is a life experience within an academic experience, which is very, very important. So it has to be a partnership. It has to be two ways. I don't think there is a side that benefits more than the other. It's really a give and take. And from a corporate standpoint, instead, for shore-based opportunities, for instance, we don't have a specific alliance with a business school or a university in particular. Geographically, we try and offer internships and positions, junior positions to the local schools. So whether, you know, I'm myself, I'm based in Monaco, the company is headquartered in Monaco, we have a university here. And I actually, when I met with the Minister of Education of Monaco, it's a small country with only 30,000 or 35,000 people living here, she was very surprised about the reaction I had to our meeting, because she was asking for Scorpio as a big employer in the Principality to get into a program where we would have provided jobs for the local students. And what I told her is that, and she said, look, you know, for your company, I would make sure that the top grades students would be, you know, on top of the list for you to interview, etc. My reply to her is, given my academic career and my results, which were not particularly good at the time during my studies, I said, you know, the top graders will find their way anyway. You know, the big corporations, the big companies will find a way, will actually want them. So they will be chasing the top graders. So let's start from the bottom of the class. You know, as long as they are good kids and honest kids, and but have maybe some trouble, you know, on the academic performance, etc., I will guarantee you, you know, a couple of places every year for those kids, so that, you know, hopefully we'll manage to get them into the life school. And, you know, I'm very happy to say that this has been a tremendous partnership, because what has happened is that a couple of people, after trying, a couple of these students, a couple of these guys and girls, after trying the real life experience, they actually became top graders in their master's classes, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later. So yeah, I will pause now because I don't want to talk too much, but that's my take or my experience on this.
I love the point you bring up though around grades, because I mean the institution I work in, it's all about grades, and you know it's.
That's why you never offered me a job.
Well, I have no idea how I got a job, quite frankly, but I was lucky enough to get in. But how do you measure, like, how do you measure grit? How do you measure determination? How do you find those intangibles, you know, when you are talking to you know, a university student and trying to find that, you know, diamond in the rough?
Look, you know, I'm atypical myself because I base all my judgments on gut feeling and on personal relationships. You know, I have dyslexia and ADHD, so I cannot read more than a paragraph that I have to start again because I don't remember what I read. And my HR head of HR actually, you know, she's always scared when you know, I need to hire somebody or I want to interview somebody myself, because the first rule for me is I don't want to see the CV. I don't want to be, and I don't want to know, I don't want to have any background or comments from people or opinions for people that have interviewed this candidate before me, because I want to form my own opinions and then compare them. And of course, we're going to have a meeting and discuss, and I will look at the CV post my meeting. But for me, it's the first impression, and the human aspect is everything. This is why I think that I'm not in any way, and don't misunderstand me, undermining the academic part. I just think that that is incredibly important, and I wish I actually had other attributes and different attributes and would have applied myself more to have a different experience as far as I'm concerned from an academic perspective, or asked for help, because maybe, you know, a few years ago when I studied, it was not as common as today to actually have ADHD, or at least it was not diagnosed in Europe, at least as frequently or as easily as it is now. But you know, I think that giving the opportunity and the chance to people to express themselves is what counts. And there are a lot of great students that focus too much on the academic side. And there are a lot of great students that feel handicapped because they actually don't succeed on the academic side as much as they would like to. So it's up to us as business leaders, it's up to us to actually identify those and create the right path for the individual that you have in front of you. But you know, it's a very difficult task, and this is why I think that schools like Gabelli and Fordham in general, I mean, have an incredible responsibility to form and allow students, allow youngsters, allow kids to express themselves, and you know, and then this is when the partnerships comes about. And the companies, the corporations need to go beyond the CV. You know, beyond the human contact becomes paramount. But you know, it's difficult, right? In a company like yours, many thousands of people, you need some process, you need some box ticking exercises. If not, you know, you just spend the day interviewing applicants. It's just impossible, right? It has, yeah, geographical context as well.
I agree. John, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think Emmanuel's summed up the tension between people's views of university. You know, is a university there to expand the body of knowledge, or is a university there to train the next generation of good people for industry and commerce? And that's the ultimate tension, because if you ask many people in universities, the university is the system for generating the next level of faculty and widening the body of knowledge, and a happy byproduct are well-trained, smart people for the workforce. I think society's moved on now and saying, you know, an integral part of your mission is to produce rounded people who understand A, the academics, but B, have a much wider view relating to society. And I think that's great. But I do think some people in the commercial world partially use universities as a selection mechanism for smartness. So I think Emmanuel's absolutely right. You know, there is a tension there between furthering the body of academic knowledge and producing, you know, well-rounded people for commerce.
Can I just sort of jump in as well, just at this point? I think one of the points that Emmanuel made about sort of not wanting to see the education on the CV, one of the things that we've implemented at EY is kind of blind scanning, so we don't actually have the information about schools, university, colleges on the CV. So that's kind of helped in that selection process and to kind of offer a much more fairer approach, I think. I just wanted to touch on that point.
Excellent, thank you. I guess, Jags, I guess staying with you and your experience at Ernst & Y, I mean, you've been, I'm sorry, Ernst & Young, E&Y, my apologies.
Does get confusing.
Yeah, too many acronyms. You've been leading the charge recently within the organization in your response, to the COVID pandemic and how you adapt, how E&Y, conducts its business during, these virtual times.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about and maybe touch upon the experiences you've had at E&Y and what you've encountered, and then think through and then maybe describe to us like what we can maybe apply to creating some better connectivity, between industry and the classroom?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'm sort of based in UK financial services. So when I talk about EY, I'm very specific to the financial services industry. I mean, we've got approximately 4,500 people in UKFS, and overnight we sort of went to this remote way of working, literally the whole of the kind of UK firm. So it was hugely challenging for us. And if I think about my role as head of marketing specifically, it was challenging because we're a traditional organization. So a lot of what we do is kind of face-to-face sort of sponsorships, marketing, meeting, greeting clients. So I think, there was a huge learning curve. And for us, we had to kind of quickly pivot the team and the business to kind of more of a digital offering, which we managed to do, it has been quite a successful move. I guess when I think about the context of where we are and what we're discussing today, learning is really important, and one of the things that we've managed to kind of continue is the support that we offer students. So I was very fortunate to be on the team that hosted Fordham University last year in London. So we hosted them for a morning. And, I think it was really important because we kind of touched on some key industry issues. And at the time, Brexit, and it still is a hot topic, was kind of something that we touched on. And then something more sort of interesting to students was cybersecurity. So we were really disappointed when we couldn't host Fordham this year, but what we have been able to do is still continue our mentoring program in the UK with students. So we do a lot with students from sort of disadvantaged backgrounds. They don't have access to businesses like ours, so we give them access, we give them a real life problem, they solve the problem. And I think you touched on this as well, Greg. So they use the skills that they're learning at university, bring that to the workplace, test those skills in a safe environment because we're mentoring them. So, whatever they say is never going to be wrong. They can just learn from it. And then we offered some of the students conversations with people that in the industry that they wanted to get into. So one of the guys that I was mentoring wanted to study law. So I put him in touch with one of our sort of newly kind of graduated lawyers, or somebody that just practiced law and was in the legal team. And I think he just found it hugely beneficial just talking and just finding more about his journey, how he got to where he was, and it kind of gave him a little bit of food for thought in terms of, what direction he was going in. So I think, what we can learn from this episode, and I don't know how long it's going to go on for, but what we can learn is that the mentoring and the learning doesn't stop because we're not doing it face to face. Students are still finding it hugely beneficial. And I think one of the harder things is the engagement. So we can't see the students today. If we were presenting in the EY office, it would be really easy. to get that level of engagement that, you know, that's kind of the tricky bit, I'd say.
And that's really helpful. And, you know, also being in an organization that went from like highly collaborative face-to-face meetings, probably way too many meetings, quite frankly, to this virtual world, you know, there are people who do it well and people who do it not so well. In your opinion, Jag, like what makes that a successful transition? Like, what are the things other than having the actual infrastructure? You know, what does the organization need to do in order to make it a as smooth and successful transition as possible? And again, with the eye towards, you know, if we can do it for our clients, is there some way we can you know, also do this, you know, for mentees or for, you know, kids in the classroom?
Yeah, so I mean, I think infrastructure was important for us. Thankfully, we all used to work from home as part of, you know, our working week. We were encouraged to work from home.
It looks like we lost Jag for a minute. Maybe she'll come back in a second. But Emanuele or John, do you want to talk about your experiences, you know, going virtual and what you think differentiates, you know, a person or an organization who does it well from, you know, doesn't do it so well?
I can jump in if you like. Having left a really big global organization, Wells Fargo, last year that had, you know, lots of recovery plans, disaster recovery plans, multiple layers of, you know, redundancy built in. You know, they reacted pretty quickly, and people, ex-colleagues I keep in touch with, you know, have reacted well. But BCP, you know, business recovery is very different from this as business as usual. And I get your point about being in meeting rooms, you know, just the logic of turning up at, you know, sensible hours, you know, following leadership examples, you know, understanding where the rubber hits the road about, you know, the ethical piece. You know, is that really the right thing to do, which is much tougher when you're sitting at home. So my sense is that as a disaster recovery, this a lot of organizations worked pretty well. But I think going forward, if this is business as usual, there's going to be a lot more work around context and about how we do develop our people going forward when there's less day-to-day contact, you know, rubbing shoulders, sitting in the office, giving a short notice assignment to get done, and then working with other people to deliver it. We had a loan closing last week at Crestline. If two people hadn't gone in the office to pore over the document, it just wouldn't have got done in a sensible period. So I hope that kind of answers your question. It kind of differentiates between disaster recovery and business as usual. I think there's a lot more thinking to be done as if this is business as usual.
I think in many respects, Greg, you know, just to add and to echo what John was saying, you know, the world has realized that we can work remotely, and we have surprised ourselves actually to the extent to which we can do this, because nobody would have entered the office in any size corporation and said, you know, everybody's going to work from home for the next 3 months now as a trial, and let's see how our systems are working. It's just impossible to think. No leader would have taken that risk. So however, with the imposition of COVID, you know, a lot of companies, big or small, have reacted better than they ever thought. So what came out of this is we all realized that the technology that is available to us today actually allows us to do things that we would not even think were possible doing. The challenges that I see or that we faced specifically within my company, you know, for the first few months, we didn't have many challenges, but onboarding new people has been the most, the biggest challenge. Because you can for a couple of months, things have gone very, very well from a day-to-day perspective. Actually, to an extent, people said, we're communicating more. Because now, I speak to my colleagues on a video conference call, whether they're sitting in Houston or in Singapore, thing that before I didn't do. I only spoke to my colleagues in London because they were here, and I don't need to speak to the ops guy or the procurement person, in Houston, because I can speak to his colleague which is sitting next to me, and I don't need to go the extra mile and have a relationship with that. So in a way, communication has been enhanced in the short term by the pandemic, ironically. What we've experienced, though, as I said, the biggest challenge has been onboarding new people. That when you lose the human contact, the human touch there, it's difficult and unfair, I would say, for the new people joining an organization without having the chance to actually go to the coffee machine and exchange a few ideas or understand a little bit of context of the place where you work. So that is the challenge for us.
I agree, and that's something that we're also grappling with, and I think the biggest concern is there's one thing to do this in a emergency setting. It's another thing to sustain an organization and sustain the culture of the organization, for a long period of time. So, what I'm hearing here is it's really finding that balance, where technology is great. It gives people a lot of flexibility. In many respects, it's actually increased productivity. However, you need to find that balance and make sure you're able to really, build the social and cultural fabric of the firm and do that in an appropriate way. And I would agree with that. We have time for one more question before we hand it off to the audience. There are some questions coming in from the audience, which is great. And John, I think this question is for you. Speaking out of one side of my mouth, partnering and giving students the ability to practically apply what they learn is a great thing. However, how do we balance that and make sure we don't cross ethical lines, and blurring the role of the university and the role of industry? And you kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. Do you want to expand on that and just provide us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I've got some reasonably strong views about this because, being cynical, I can sit in the business and saying all the university wants to do is either sell me a course or use my data for a research project. And, there's some truth in that, but, not a lot, because, we should be embracing advances in knowledge. The challenge for us, sometimes in business is when I read academic papers now, some of them are so obscure. So, my business, we should be on top of economics. And if I pick up a journal now, I've got 2 degrees, a degree in physics, and I really struggle. And that's a challenge because we as managers want to know how to apply this knowledge in our businesses. So partnering, I think, with a uni absolutely makes sense in specialist areas. Manuel mentioned the maritime area. A lot of people in materials science want to partner with unis, robotics, machine learning, artificial intelligence. We want to partner where the knowledge is, where the up-to-date knowledge is. Management is always a tricky thing. I mean, I loved my MBA. I think it's fantastic. And I heard an expression the other day, which cracked me up. A client, a CEO was saying, I got into the trouble because I picked the wrong case study to copy in my business. And that's always an interesting thing, is where you take the knowledge and apply the context to your organization. So I have worked with universities in the past, mostly around management development, I have to say, people being promoted to the first time in significant management positions. I have encouraged to do either shorter or longer courses, and, regularly look at hiring MBAs as well. So I guess that's my piece there, is understanding what both parties want out of the relationship. Is it a selling relationship? We're selling you our knowledge and our history and brand name to develop your staff, or is it research, in which case you know, there's potentially a lot in it for both parties.
You're right. And who owns what in that relationship, and who's influencing who in that relationship, I think is the tough thing to balance. Jag, thank you. I'm sorry you dropped before. Thanks for rejoining. Do you have anything you want to add? You got cut off before. Do you have anything you want to add to that before we open up questions from the audience?
No, I'm happy for the questions now. Sorry for the technology failing.
I know that was coincidence. Great. So looking, we got a question here from the crowd. Emanuele, this is geared towards you, but I think we can all have an opportunity to try to answer it. And this person is asking about what qualities do you look for, you know, from the students from the bottom of the class, you know, those students that kind of dazzle you. And, you know, are there any metrics, non-academic metrics, you think universities should adopt to try to identify, you know, those sort of students?
A good question. The short answer is, for me at least, what I look at the bottom of from the qualities of the bottom of the class, I would say creativity. If a student has failed in getting the proper grades, at least it has to have other qualities. And creativity is a quality that is not graded, but that can bring and add a lot of value to organizations. However, of course, one cannot generalize. You have to, you know, I wouldn't hire a bottom of the class person for a specific job in finance, for instance, or you know, you sort of want the skill set in there. That's what you need. So I think for a leader, the biggest success is actually to be surround himself with all the skill sets that are available. But you know, not necessarily the top grade in the class is going to be the best salesperson. You know, I listed companies on the New York Stock Exchange. I was at the time in 2009 when I started my roadshow. I was going to be one of the youngest CEOs of companies on the New York Stock Exchange, and I remember before entering these meetings, you know, everything was, you know, big, and I was scared about the process. And I remember talking to, you know, a colleague of mine, which was sort of teaching me before the meeting or feeding me information before the meeting. And I stopped him and I said, you know what, just stop there. I don't want to hear this. And he's like, why? You know, I'm trying to help you. And I said, I don't want to know too much because I don't want to enter in that room and lie. If I know too much, I can lie. If I don't know, it's much easier for me to actually say to a potential investor or to a potential shareholder, I don't know. And the power of the truth is incredible. So creativity, to go back to the question more specifically, is what I look for at the bottom of the class as a quality.
Very interesting. Jag, John, do you want to add to that?
I think for me, it's I always sort of say to my team just to be curious. So, you know, if you're learning kind of while you're working, that's not a bad thing. If you're asking the right questions, I mean, in the type of environment we work, we're brand marketing and communications. We always work with technical people in our business. So, you know, there's no harm in being curious and asking questions. And it's good just to understand what you are taking out to market.
From my point of view, it's a really great question and a really tough thing to deal with because on the one hand, certain professional exams certain MBAs, it's pass or fail. You don't know the GPA of the individual student. It's literally pass or fail. So you have to do the work to think, are they the smartest or are they the academically weakest? You've got those professional exams in self-marked courses where lecturers, teachers have to set the exams and mark them. There is a kind of incentive that you don't really want too many of your students to fail. You have to meet certain standards clearly, but you can see that a little bit in the UK with the final exams for 17, 18-year-olds in the UK, where overall average rates are going up and up and up. You know, as it becomes more systematic to, there's a competition between the examining boards, and you don't want too many people failing, otherwise schools will choose another board. So we may get back to the situation where universities do their own entrance exams again, and you have to do an entrance exam for every university you apply to, which is an interesting take. But to Emmanuel's point, you know, there's sometimes reasons why people come out with lower seconds or thirds. You know, they might have started a business, they might be trading, they might have done something completely different. And that's what you're looking for in the interview. You know, if you allow them into an interview with a third, they may be brilliant, but academia hasn't suited them.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, you know, finding somebody who's just interested. You know, I love looking at the extracurriculars, and I love asking people why, you know, they do certain things. And you know, one of the greatest responses is because I found it interesting. I wanted to try it. I was curious. I was, you know, that to me, those are qualities you can't teach people. And I think, you know, using that as a kind of springboard to further understand whether a person has a curious mind, or, you know, whether they're very focused on a single thing, whether it be grades or being the best in their sport or whatever. You know, I think that's an interesting way of doing it. And, you know, again, that's a little bit more difficult in the post-COVID age, where you're trying to do that, you know, virtually. It's always easier and better to do that, you know, when you're looking at somebody face to face. But this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your participation in it. And, you know, I wish we had more time, but I think our time is now up. I was told we have to 5:55, and it's 5:56. So I'm going to hand it back to Megan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.